So what is motivation? Processes that account for an individual's intensity, direction, and persistence. So it really has those three things over time toward a goal. So intensity is the amount of effort you put in. The direction is where you're channeling that, what it's toward. And then persistence is how long you stick with it. So all of those things really are talking about motivation. There's internal, so that comes from within, like Maslow's hierarchy. Have many people here heard of Maslow's hierarchy before? You should have. And most people have heard of it in some class.
Like the hierarchy of needs?
Yes, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yep, that's it. So internal based motivation. My thing is, there's cognitive based, where you actually think about and get motivated by the thought process. An example of that is expectancy theory, and we'll talk about that briefly during the time tonight. And the third one are where we're called external or non-cognitive. And that's primarily behavioral psychology. And we'll talk about how that's different than the other two before we're done tonight. So those three: internal, cognitive, and non-cognitive or behavioral. So the early theories, Maslow's hierarchy is one of those early theories of need-based or internally based. And then there's McGregor's X and Y, which is people don't really refer to much anymore. And Hertzberg's, I like Hertzberg's approach. It's really a modification of Maslow, and you'll see in a few minutes what I'm talking about. I like it because it really applies very well to workplace settings. It has a real nice sense of working in workplace. And then McClellan's theory of needs, which we won't talk about at all, so you won't have to even worry about that. So there's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've probably seen that before. What Maslow said was you start at the bottom, and if your physiological needs aren't met, you will ignore everything else. And then once your physiological needs are met, then safety becomes more important. And then once physiological just is what it sounds like, because it's food, sleep, those types of things. Safety becomes important once your physiological needs are met. So there's this hierarchy they build. Once you have once you have your safety needs met, then social needs become important, and then self-esteem needs. And he called the top was self-actualization. And Maslow actually said that there are very few people who are self-actualized. It's a very small percentage. He would say people like Gandhi, would be someone who was self-actualized, where he really fulfilled all his needs and sort of a higher level of being. Maslow didn't do any types of research or studies to come up with this. He just sort of looked at famous people and said it appeared this was the way it was. And it appeared that way that, if your physiological needs are met, if you're out in the cold and you don't have shelter and food, you're not going to care about whether you have friends. So you're not going to have social needs if those physiological needs aren't met. They just get wiped out by that. And there's some, there is some sort of logic to that. I think most of us would say, yeah, there's kind of a logic to that. That when there's if I'm really hungry, I don't care much about certain other things. And the idea then is that you have to take care of those physiological needs first. Otherwise, people won't be motivated, which says, on a sociological basis, well, if you have a lot of poor people who are starving in the country, you got to take care of those things first before you start to talk about higher level needs for them as individuals. So that makes it has sort of a common sense feel to it. One of the videos that I want you to watch, and if we have time tonight, if I get it to work, I'd be glad to show it to you. is sort of a real life counter to that, that takes people in a very poor part of the world and shows how they people will walk hours every day to meet social and esteem needs, even though they're extremely poor. So it kind of, in some ways, disproves Maslow's hierarchy. So, he said that, they go, it's just another way to look at the same thing. They really go from the higher level needs to the lower level needs to higher level needs. There's safety and psychological, or safety, that should be safety and physiological. It's not psychological. Bottom line should be physiological. Then social esteem, self-actualization. McGregor is another one that's sort of an internally driven. He just divided things into two areas. McGregor was really big.
Oh, mine's 6:30.
Did you want to say something? Sorry. If anybody wants to say something, just put your hand up. So I should be able to see that then. McGregor was early sort of management theory. He talked about theory X and theory Y. Theory X is where the idea is sort of a negative view of people. So theory X motivation and management was you feel like people must be, the last thing on the left there, need to be coerced or controlled or threatened. People won't do things unless they're forced to do them. And he said that the theory Y managers are those that think about, no, you need to be positive and supportive of people. That's what motivates them. And he categorized all managers into two ways of motivating. Most of us can think of a theory X manager we've had and a theory Y manager we've had. Not a lot of good real research data supporting those, though. Hertzberg is the one I like, because what Hertzberg, of these need-based theories, because Hertzberg really took Maslow's hierarchy, and he said there's two types of needs. There are what he called hygiene factors, and the hygiene factors are really the bottom two of Maslow's hierarchy. Okay, so they're those physiological and safety needs are what he called hygiene needs. And he said that those don't motivate, but when they're missing, they're a dissatisfier. Okay, so that if you're working for me and I have this physical plant, wherever all of you are sitting around, we'll take you back a couple hundred years. All of you are sitting around this factory and you're knitting shirts or something like that. You're sewing shirts. What Hertzberg would say is, well, if the factory is cold and you have hard surfaces that sit on that are uncomfortable, that's going to be a dissatisfier. You're not going to be very motivated because that's not a very pleasant thing. But, once we get you a comfortable seat and with the temperature up so it's reasonable, giving you like a $2,000 chair isn't going to make you work any harder, because it doesn't make you any more comfortable than a $20 chair will make you. Right? So if it's missing, it's a dissatisfier, the hygiene needs. If they're there, they're just sort of neutral. And then he said the top areas of Maslow's hierarchy, those are what he called the motivational factors. And that is, if they're not there, it's like neutral. But if they are there, then those can be a motivator. So those take you a step above. So, if you have all the hygiene needs, they're kind of neutral. But then to really motivate people beyond that, you give them things like they list there: promotional opportunities, some personal growth, recognition, responsibility, achievement. If you think about it, those on the right are very much like that Drive book, right? Because they're talking about the things that are, achievement, growth, promotion. Those are all things that have to do with making you a better person in some ways to think about. Okay, does that make sense? I kind of like that. This one really does have a true logic to it. If you think about it, if Spring Arbor went out and really equipped every classroom to be like really comfortable chairs, like reclining gamer chairs and stuff like that, that wouldn't make you listen any better in class. But if you had really uncomfortable seating in class, that might interfere with your listening, right? So seating and that environment, that physical environment, is a hygiene factor. So if it's bad, it's going to be a dissatisfier up to sort of a neutral point. But if it's like really super comfortable, it's probably not going to help your studying. In fact, it might be negative. It might make you fall asleep because it's so comfortable. So then how do you motivate people? You have to do that with those more personal types of things. So it's another way to look at hygiene factors are basically work conditions. There's a question for anybody. Anybody here had a job that was like really bad physical working conditions? Anybody been one of those? If you were, just speak up. Nobody? Sometimes people think of things like fast food type jobs and stuff that way. Where the working conditions are just not good. It's hot. It's not a very nice work environment. It's just and that can be a real demotivator. Doesn't make you want to show up to work or anything.
So I worked the night shift, which was pretty hard.
Yes. Yeah, and that can be, and those are really hard because of your circadian rhythms, your sleep cycles and stuff get thrown off. It can actually be physiologically really rough on you. And then the motivation factors are things like job enrichment, and they really lead to higher levels of performance. Oops, let me get rid of that there. So another way to look at, there's all types of hygiene factors and motivation factors. Just a lot of different ways of looking at it. You all have these slides, so I send them to you. So if you combine these, if you were in a situation where you had high hygiene factors and high motivation factors, you get high motivation and very few complaints over here on this left upper side. If you have high hygiene factors but a bad work environment, or low high hygiene factors and a low motivation factors in the upper right, you get low motivation, but you don't get a lot of complaints. It's sort of neutral. Low, bottom right, you get low motivation and a lot of complaining. Low hygiene but high motivation. Sometimes you'll have high motivation, but people will complain anyway. So that they feel like they're getting some stuff done, but it's just not a very good environment. And so it tells you if you're in a working situation to try and pay attention to both of those. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations put way too much weight on hygiene factors. If you think about it, hygiene factor. If we just go out and bought, if we equipped everybody's office with nicer equipment, if we gave them nice chairs, if we gave them bigger offices, oh boy, then they'd really be motivated. And the research shows that it's just not true. Give people an extra special work environment, doesn't affect most people at all. Give them a bad work environment, it negatively impacts them. Okay. I'm going to actually skip through McClellan's because we're not going to cover that at all. So I'm going to skip those slides. So this is sort of comparing those. Actually, we only did 1 and 3 here. There's your hierarchy of needs. Maslow's on the left. The one that's the third one over is a motivation hygiene factors. You can see how they overlap. They're really the motivation hygiene. Hertzberg is a sub breakdown of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Anything stick out for anybody so far? How are we doing time-wise? Not bad. Anybody?
The definitely the high, like the Maslow's ones I'm pretty familiar with because we went over that a good bit during when I first did a psych class. That was pretty famous, but the hygiene one's definitely interesting because I haven't had any jobs that are too bad, thankfully, but I definitely I've felt a lot of that, especially when you're working outside. The main thing you're thinking about is the discomfort, not the benefits, and like there's also to a degree that if like the hygiene's not good enough, the other motivations I feel like they're not like.
Yeah, if the hygiene ones are negative,
Yeah, the high ones are negative, and if the negatives are too high, then the positives are kind of being wasted.
Yep, yep, yep. That's what can happen. So for instance, let's say I had a construction crew, and we're in Michigan and we do a lot of outdoor work. We have to work through the winter. So how could I help my construction crew um, with better hygiene factors in the wintertime? What would I do?
Well, one thing you might do is like you might provide them with some like hand warmers or something at the very least. Make sure they're wearing coats and stuff because obviously if they're freezing and stuff, they're not going to be working effectively no matter like how much you're paying them. You can pay them 50 an hour, but if they can't work comfortably at all, they're probably not going to be getting much done.
Right. So in fact, I might go out and buy them all, for deep winter work. I might give everybody, down jackets and down filled pants and stuff like that. So in the wintertime, when they're outside and it's 10 degrees in Michigan, they can actually work without being freezing all the time. And I might have different things for different weather. Have rain gear, for when it's raining, if we have to work through the rain. So all of those things seem little like, oh, that's just, clothing. But if it's something that makes them physically comfortable, it'll have a big impact. And I've known that, having worked in that type of outdoor work, it's really hard in the wintertime. Um, the textbook covers a couple of these other types of theories in terms of more contemporary types of things. We're not going to talk about most of these. We'll talk a little bit about a couple of them. We'll talk about expectancy theory and a little bit about goal setting. But most of these we're going to sort of skip over. Again, you can see a real overlap with the upper level things of Maslow's hierarchy with job engagement, because they're really talking about things, emotional energies and job performance and all that. Goal setting gets used a lot in business and in organizations where we talk about goals, where you set goals for individuals. Anybody ever heard of SMART goals? The SMART stands for certain things. Anybody know what those stand for? What's the S? Anybody know?
Specific,
Nice, very well done. How about M?
Measurable,
A.
achievable,
Wow, boy, you're an excellent person. R.
relevant,
Woo. T.
like times something.
Time bounded or
Okay.
there's a time limit. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Nicely done. Whoa, boys, extra points. Extra points. So when goal setting does work, think back to the very first class when I think a couple of you said that you were sort of struck by this when I talked about that change readiness model. All of these things, especially things like goal setting, doesn't come into play unless the person is ready to act on those things. So if they're not ready to take on the behavior you want to take on, they're not psychologically, mentally ready for it. Even if it's a SMART goal, it isn't going to get them anywhere. If they haven't decided that, yeah, this is something I need to do differently, even though it's a, in quotes, SMART goal, with all those things of measurable and have time restricted and all, all that, it's not going to achievable. You're still not going to move. So it's really a mental component. All that comes to play even in the workplace. Management by objectives is really, it used to be big a few years ago in business. Everybody's talking about MBO. Management by objective. Manage people by the objectives we give them, whether they achieve those objectives. It's really just a variation of goal setting. I mean, if you look at it, it's talking about having goal specificity, explicit time periods, performance feedback. That sounds kind of like measurement, doesn't it? The only thing that gets added in there is the idea of some participatory aspect of it in terms of setting the goals. So a lot of these things, what's kind of funny in the whole management field is, like a lot of other things, somebody asked, it was the first or second class about reading, about different reading models that you were taught in school. We talked about that for a few minutes. Business kind of does that with things like management. We recycle through things every 5 to 10 years. We pull something up from 30 years ago and think it's new all of a sudden, but it was something that somebody talked about 30 years ago. And keep in mind that all of these things are just theories. Okay, we don't know what really motivates people. I mean, we're guessing at it. And what we as humans do is we like models, right? We like a model that helps us sort of explain things to ourselves. So we like these models, we like these theories. So there's all different theories of psychology that way too, right? Which one is right? Well, they're all right, and they're all kind of wrong too, because they're all just a theory. And what a theory is just a good guess. A theory is a good guess to try and help explain it. We do that even not just with behavior and mental activity. We do that even in medicine. I mean, a lot of the ways we say that we explain the way our biological system fits with our mental health and all that, we're just coming up with theories. We don't know exactly what's happening with those cells at the cellular level. We just make some assumptions and we come up with models to explain it. We're gonna well, self-efficacy is an interesting one. Anybody ever heard of oh gosh, what's his name? No, I'm drawing a blank on his name. Who did the modeling experiments? Oh, I'm drawing a blank on his name. I shouldn't. But anyway, he found out that the kids, you know, that how much you believe you can do something has a huge impact on how well you can do it. If you have a sense that you are capable, that's really important. So if you can build in the sense of capability in a person, they will be able to do more. And you do that by those types of things. You know, helping them gain experience, vicarious modeling. People, if you well, all mammals, but humans too, we learn by modeling, by observing other people do things. In fact, his famous, anybody heard of the Bobo doll experiment? Anybody studied that like an intro psych? Nobody has. Okay, the Bobo doll.
Is that the clown doll that gets punched and stuff?
Yep. That's exactly right. Yep. Yeah, his name will come to me. The psychologist. I shouldn't not remember, but anyway, Bandura. There it is. Just came to me. Bandura. He took little kids. This was like maybe in the 1960s or something. He took little kids, and he had this Bobo doll. It was like one of those punching dolls, you know, that rocks up and down like inflated. And they had and it was a really well designed, really well scientifically designed experiment, because he had, like, you know, control groups and experimental groups, and he had you know, female models being nice to the doll and hitting the doll, and male models being nice to the doll and hitting so we had all these variations within the whole system. But what was interesting was that when little kids like kindergarten age were exposed to more aggressive and violent behavior, they modeled it. And what was interesting was, if you took little girls, they were more affected by women models than they were by men models. And little boys were more affected by male models than they were by female models. It was really a fascinating study that showed that, you know, what you do in front of a kid does have an impact. You know, when we see things, we model it. So vicarious modeling, if you see somebody else do the task, can have a big impact. And we do that. I said to one day in class, maybe it was after class, to the people who are the tennis players, you know, you can do that with sports. I mean, what's the first way most sports coaches teach you how to do something? You get all the little kids out there playing soccer. What's the first thing you do? You show them how to run and kick the ball. And they see you do it, and then they try and do it. That's modeling. So we do it a lot in sports with little kids. But we even do it with little kids where we show them in kindergarten how to trace out the letters, right? And they see you doing it in a certain order, and then they copy it. So that's modeling. But all of those things, verbal persuasion, getting people energized, improve their self feelings of self-efficacy, which improves their ability to do things. Equity theory, employees goes behind the idea that employees weigh what they put into a job versus what they get out. And they, in essence, sort of balance those. So that I think I mentioned it in the first class with the IBM study I said with the salespeople. I don't know if you remember that, where I said, IBM found that it wasn't the money that motivated people. People were motivated by a certain level of of satisfaction from the money. And what they do once they hit that target level for them, they found easier ways to do the job. So they were getting more out of it by putting less effort in and getting the same money out. So in essence, they weighed their input to their output. If I can get, if I have to work 3 times as hard to make 10% more money, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to sort of mentally weigh that out. Like, man, I'm working a lot harder than I was before, and I'm only making a little bit more. Why would I put all that effort in? So we sort of have this equation that runs in our brain as the theory behind it. And we figure those things out. My output over my input, is it equal to yours, and is it worth it for me to do? Okay. I'm going to skip that part. Expectancy theory is one of the ones that's getting into the cognitive types of theories. And what it says is that it's related to equity theory, and that you put in individual effort, there's individual performance, there's organizational rewards, and there's goals. And it's a series of balances that you go through. So people perceive these 3 things. There's a probability that goes on in your head. This is behind equity theory. That if I put in more effort, does it make me more successful? So I look at that. That's one of the things I look at. If I put in more effort, will it make me more successful? If I don't think it will make me more successful, I won't put in more effort. We kind of balance those out. Then we look at, if I'm successful, will that get me to a better reward? If being successful doesn't get me more rewards, I probably won't do it. And then the third one is, will those rewards lead to my own personal goals? And if they won't, I probably won't do it. So we go through this action in our head of saying, is it worth the effort I'm putting in at a lot of different levels? So one of the ways you can use that is, what is it that each employee wants, and then figure out how you can get them there. What levels of effort would they need to put in to get to that place? And make sure that it's possible. That's another part of this expectancy theory. If I don't think it's possible, I won't even attempt it. Let me give you an example. Let's say we were in the classroom up in Poling, and I said to all of you, tell you what, I'll give anybody in the room, I'll take the money out, and I have $500, 5 $100 bills. I tell you, I'll give anybody in this room all $500 bills. We're going to go outside. If any one of you can run around the building in 5 seconds or less, using no special equipment, would any of you be motivated to even try? No, because the expectation is so high, nobody can do it. So why would I even attempt it? I know I'm not going to do it. That makes sense? Another expectation that comes into play, and this happens, I've experienced this in situations, and I've worked with managers I've known that are like this. The other expectation is not only can I achieve the expectation, but there's an expectation, would I actually get the reward? So let's say, for instance, I've made promises to people numerous times as a boss, and you as employees have been watching me. Well, let's say I'm teaching in a classroom, and I make promises to people that, if you answer an extra question, I'll give you extra points for your grade. And then you're 5 weeks through the season, a bunch of people have gotten supposedly extra points during class, but it never shows up in the grade book. What's going to happen is people are going to say, why would I ever attempt this? Because even if I achieve it, I'm not going to get the reward. He's not reliable. They won't be motivated at that point anymore. Okay. And the third equation that comes into play is, is the reward reasonable in terms of effort and outcome, right? So the running around polling, I say to you, anybody here can run around polling in less than, make it sort of reasonable. I don't know what would be a good time, maybe like 30 seconds. I'll give everybody who does that 2 cents. Would anybody do it? Probably not. Because 2 cents isn't big enough. It's, the reward isn't equivalent to the effort. So we go through these expectancies. If I put in a certain amount, I expect a certain outcome. If I'm asked to do something, can I expect that I would be able to do it? If I am expected to do something, would the reward be worth it? Is it possible? Is it likely I'm going to get the reward? I worked with a guy who owned like 12 restaurants. And every year he told his managers at every restaurant that if you really make your restaurant profitable, down the road, I'll give you, a stake in the company. You'll get some profit. You'll get a profit bonus. Well, I knew the guy for about 8 years, and his business started to fall apart because after 8 years, he had never delivered on that promise to any of his managers. Not once. And most of them ran really profitable operations. They were making him a lot of money. And every year when it came to the bonus time, he always had an excuse. Well, we didn't do quite as well as I thought we would this year, but next year. And what happened after that number of years? All of a sudden, all of his managers who were really good managers started bailing on him. Some people would say, if you want an expectancy theory person would say, there's what he was doing. He was raising these expectations and then never delivering on them. And after a reasonable amount of time, people just didn't believe it anymore. Why would we trust him? He's not going to do it. And then they all started bailing out on him, taking jobs, doing other things. So expectancy theory comes down to these three things. Do you believe you can do it? Do you believe the performance is linked to the actual results? And do you believe the results are worth the effort? Has sort of a natural kind of a logical appeal to it, doesn't it? And if you don't do it, or you won't do it, if you don't believe it's worth the effort. Okay, anything stand out for anybody? Oops, hold on a second.
I think the equity theory is interesting.
Which one?
The equity theory.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about any of those? Before we get into behavioral? No? Nobody? So non-cognitive behavioral focuses on environmental elements to explain behavior. Behaviorism really breaks down to two areas, classical and operant conditioning. The psych people should understand what those are. So I may call on those people to handle some of this, huh? They could probably do it. And there is a distinct difference between classical and operant conditioning, and both of them do have impact in the workplace. Okay. And by the way, the third one, modeling, is considered part of the behavioral makeup too. Bandura's modeling is behavioral. So classical conditioning, that's Pavlov and his dog. Everybody knows about Pavlov, right? So let me go through it. Most people don't know that Pavlov was actually a Russian physiologist. He was not a psychologist. He was a physiologist around the turn of the 20th century. And what he was doing was he was actually studying salivation in dogs. He was studying dog digestion. And for all of us mammals, the first part of our digestive process is the saliva in your mouth. Okay. So as you start to chew food while it's still in your mouth, the digestive process has started. So here's something for you to do. You ready for this? This is really kind of cool. And I learned this from my health coaching stuff. If you take, let's say, two, saltine crackers, just saltine crackers, and you brush the salt off of them. All right. Put them in your mouth and start chewing them. Don't swallow them, though. Just keep chewing them. And for most people, not all, but for most people, after about 30 to 45 seconds, you will notice the crackers start to taste sweet. And what is happening is the crackers mixing with your saliva, because crackers are carbohydrate. It's flour. They actually start to turn to sugar. So the crackers actually start to digest before you even swallow them if you chew on them for a little while. So Pavlov was studying this whole digestive process. Okay. He's doing this with dogs, but he had to figure out ways to measure it. So he actually had a little tube stuck into each dog's jaw where their saliva glands would secrete saliva, and he would catch it in a little test tube to see how much dogs salivated with different types of foods, to see which things, triggered more salivation. But his experiment failed because he would only get into 2 rounds of giving the dogs food. And as he's preparing the food, before he gives it to the dogs, they start to salivate. So he literally, in his original writing, called them psychic dogs, because the dogs were salivating before the food ever got there. So he was trying, and then he started playing around with things like, okay, how do we disguise this so the dogs don't know we're preparing food? So we won't do it in front of them so they won't see it. And they'd still start salivating. So they thought, well, wait a minute, they must be hearing us preparing the food. So we went through all these building rooms that were soundproof and everything, so the dogs couldn't anticipate. But if there were any signals that got through the dogs, they started. Well, what he found out, what he discovered, which we call now classical conditioning, or Pavlovian conditioning, some people call it, is that the physical act of salivation gets triggered by some neutral stimulus, like the sound of preparing the food in the dish. If you've ever had a dog, you know that. All you have to do, the dog can be in the other room, and they hear you taking out the bag of dog food, or they hear you pouring it into the dish, they're there and they're ready to eat. So that thing that has nothing to do with eating, the food dumping into the bowl or whatever, it starts them salivating. It's not just they're coming out to get it, the digestive process had started. So what it means is we can have a neutral stimuli that will trigger physiological things in us, but not just physiological, all types of other things too, even mental and emotional reactions can be triggered by neutral stimuli, which is why what you do if you're training dogs, you use a dog clicker. Because when you use a dog clicker, you give the dog the treat and you click it at the same time. And then you give a dog a treat and click it at the same time. And after just 3 or 4 times doing that, you click the dog and it feels satisfied, just like it was eating the treat. So your dog clicker becomes a reward and you don't have to give it food every time. So you're pairing this neutral stimulus of a clicking sound with a reward. I've heard an interview with a orthopedic surgeon who trains his medical doctor interns that way. He has a dog clicker. This sounds weird, but it's true. He has a dog clicker. And whenever they do anything right, when they're practicing like cutting bones and stuff like that, they don't do it on real people, but they're practicing how to do that. And they do it right. He walks by and says, good job, and goes click, click. And after just a few times, he doesn't have to say good job anymore. He walks by somebody, pats him on the shoulder, and goes click, click. He said they get a big smile on their face, and you can tell they feel happy. because that neutral stimulus of the clicking sound actually gives them the same reward as him saying, "Nice job, Victoria. You did a wonderful job in that." Clicking sound. So that's what happens. By the way, in life, in the workplace, the same thing can happen. Let's say I'm consider myself a tough boss. Well, let's say I consider myself a tough professor. So anybody who shows up late to class, I'm gonna give them a hard time. So one day you come 2 minutes late and you walk in the room, and I'm already started. And as you walk in, I say, "What the heck are you doing?" I yell at you and I say, "Why are you late? And what's the reasoning for that?" And I now ask you a simple question. The next time we have class, as you're approaching class, do you think you're going to want to be in that class more or want to be in that class less because of what happened to you the last time? And it won't be that you're even thinking about it. It's as you're approaching polling, you might start to get a little bit of a queasy stomach or start to have a little bit of anxiety. Like, is he going to yell at me again? That's in real life classical conditioning. And it can happen at any level. It can happen in any type of relationship, but it can especially happen in the workplace. So one of the things I would do with classical conditioning when I was working with managers, and I would see they were that type of person, I would ask them, go through a thing like, "No, that you told me about how you've torn into them 4 or 5 times when they're late. Well, let me ask you a question. You think they, when they're on their way to work, you think they want to be at work? Or do you think they're maybe being a little hesitant because of what they're going to have to encounter?" And my question then after that would be, do you want them dreading coming to work? Or do you want them feeling good about coming to work? Let's build in a way to make them feel good coming to work. And you don't do that by yelling at them. And by the way, that type of thing happens naturally. It's not something, you don't have to even be thinking about it. It can just happen naturally. That's classical conditioning. So that's one part of behaviorism. Any questions about any of that? Does that make sense? Simple question. Has anybody experienced that themselves? I can say that, it's why some people, you just get physically close to them and you don't want to be around them, or as you're approaching them, or even when you just think about them, you start to not feel good about things. Why is that? Because you've had experiences in the past with that person that made you feel that way. It's the same, by the way, classical conditioning at its extreme is PTSD. Okay? The person has had such a traumatic event, it has such a big impact on them. Anything that even marginally reminds them of that event will send them into PTSD. So if they were over in Afghanistan and they were driving down a road, approaching a bridge, when they saw the vehicle in front of them blow up and all their friends get killed, just driving down the highway approaching bridge might flash them back into that same type of reaction. That's classical conditioning at its extremest. You'll start to feel that way. So that's really powerful stuff. Really, really powerful stuff. Operant conditioning. So classical conditioning is something that happens, something neutral happens at the same time as behavior, and it gets paired up with that behavior. So it's basically at the same time. Operant conditioning is carrots and sticks, where typically the reward or punishment comes immediately after the behavior. Okay. As soon as possible after makes it more powerful. That's why I think I mentioned in one of our earlier classes why giving people like annual reviews and telling them good things about their job isn't going to have much of an impact because it's too long after the behavior. If I don't tell you you did a good job until 9 months later, it's not going to have much impact on you. The sooner I tell you you did a good job, the more impact it has on you. So the sooner I can get you the reward, the better off it is. By the way, that's another reason why pay or bonuses aren't the greatest rewards, because you have to wait some sort of a pay period to get it to the person. You know, if you have to wait until the next month, it doesn't have as much impact as if you could deliver it immediately. Okay. The carrots and sticks too of operant conditioning is also based on how often you reward. Okay. So there are a couple ways to think about it. I could reward you every time you do it. If I reward you every time, if every time you turn in a paper to me, I give you a reward. That will make your behavior climb really fast to the front end, but it falls off real quickly. There's something about the reward loses its impact fairly quickly. If I reward you on what's called a fixed schedule, which could be a fixed time period or every fifth time. Those are two different types of fixed schedules. So like I reward you once a day, or I reward you, every fifth time you do some action. What will actually happen is your behavior will go up and down around the reward time. So that's why here, let you think about this one. If you've ever had a job you didn't care very much for, answer this question. Was it at least a little bit better around payday? Most people will say, yeah. Around payday, it was a little bit better because I was getting paid. But the 3 days furthest away from this, like, man, I didn't like that job at all. But on payday, I guess it wasn't that bad because I was getting something. I was getting a reward. So every 7th day or every 14th day, it wasn't quite that bad because that's when reward occurred. What they have found with operant conditioning is the best schedule of reinforcement or reward is, anybody know? I should ask this. Anybody know what's the best schedule for reinforcement? The thing that'll make you most hooked on doing something by getting rewarded for it. Anybody know? Nobody? Okay. One last chance. Nobody wants to try? Okay. The best schedule of reward is a random or intermittent schedule. The reward comes and you never know when it's going to happen. That will keep you hooked on something at the highest level. Now, in life right now, what is highly addictive because you're getting a random schedule of reinforcement? You folks do it probably every day. Anybody? No? Internet games. You never know when you're going to win, and every once in a while you do. Sometimes you win every third time. Sometimes it takes you 20 times playing it to win. That randomness of it keeps you hooked. By the way, that's why gambling is addictive. Gambling is addictive because you never know when you're going to win. And every once in a while you win, and it's usually, sometimes it's when you think you're going to win, sometimes it's when you think you're not going to win. And that makes it, that's what a psychological addiction is. A psychological addiction is you have gotten hooked on that, on getting rewarded. And it's because it's at a random schedule, so you can't anticipate it. And it being random, and what people do is they start to attach things to that randomness. Has anybody known anybody, maybe even yourself, that you have things like your lucky socks? Like every time I wear these socks, we always win the game. Well, you're just attaching that to it. You won the game because you played better than the other team. That's why you won the game. But we try and attach meaning to it at some level. But yeah, random rewards are highly addictive. Gambling is the best example of that. You get rewarded unexpectedly. And modeling, which I've already mentioned briefly, is the idea of learning by observation and the Bobo doll. The idea that you learn by observing other people do it. And all of these come into play all the time. So classical conditioning and operant conditioning and observation can all be helping to motivate you and actually hook you on doing things. By the way, the operant conditioning and classical conditioning also get brought into place. The idea that reward on a psychological level has a physiological component to it. You all get that extra burst. You get the adrenaline burst. That you get from doing things. The dopamine. You get a dopamine hit. And by the way, social media knows how to do that too. They don't want to reward you every time, but they feed you things. And then they feed you things that are like what you typically look at. And then they feed you slightly away from it. And that makes it more random. They don't want to feed you always the same stuff all the time. Have you ever noticed that on social media, that all of a sudden one day, it's not the stuff you usually watch or look at. They're feeding you things that are slightly off from it. What they're doing is they're playing with you to increase the randomness of you getting your dopamine hit, because if it's more random, it's more powerful. It hooks you on randomness. So the social media industry with the algorithms plays with that, and they've been able to fine tune it. And they're doing experiments all the time. Things like Facebook and Instagram and stuff and TikTok are constantly experimenting with every one of us to get us most hooked and finding ways to do it. It's kind of spooky. So let's stop there for a second because it's 7:30. Should we take just a couple minute break? Like about a 5-minute break? Write down anything. Anybody want to say anything that stood out so far for you that struck a chord? Anybody? Want to jump in? Is any of that useful in terms of helping you understand how you might work with other people? By the way, if you're consciously aware of this type of stuff, and you don't do this in a manipulative way, but what we're talking about here is a real powerful thing in relationships. So let's say you're dating somebody and you'd like him to wash your car, So you get him to wash the car together. And after he washes the car for you, you give him a big hug, and he gets all smiley. And, and then the next time you do it, you say, oh, could you do most of the work? And you give him another big hug. Well, now all you got to do is hug him and he'll wash your car. That's operant conditioning. You just now condition him to wash your car for you. On the other hand, if you're mean to him and you yell at him and you scream at him, why aren't you washing my car? That's probably doing the opposite. Right? Because that's a punishment type of a thing. And nobody wants to get punished for something. So if you want to have a growing relationship, use positive reinforcement with each other and link positive experiences to time being together, and will help make it a better relationship. So those are natural things that occur all the time in our lives. And sometimes we don't even realize we're doing it, but we're pushing someone away because we're doing the wrong things. We're actually doing things that are negative for that person, or punishing for them, and then we're expecting them to like us more after we've made them feel really awful, or made them uncomfortable, or did things that didn't help the relationship. So this is all kind of logical stuff that, the more you can do that, the more you can have good relationships too. And it works at work too. If you're going to be good to your employees, but again, you don't want to reward them for bad behavior either. So if you reward them for not doing things well, that's just going to make more of that happen. And if we were in a strictly psych class, more counseling or clinical, I could show you next time we have a class in about a 20-minute experiment. And I've done this before. It's never more than 25 or 30 minutes. But in a 20-minute experience, I can show you how to use operant or classical conditioning to lower your anxiety about things in 20 seconds or 20 minutes. I can teach you a technique, which is like Pavlov's dog with the bell ringing, that you can do on yourself to help lower your own anxiety. It's a fascinating thing. And it's incredibly powerful. And I would sometimes do that with managers. if they're dealing with certain situations or things, you can teach a person how to lower their own anxiety without just by pairing, doing like Pavlov's dog with the bell, but in a reverse way, making it for positive things. Okay, it's 7:33. So why don't we take a 5 minute or so break? I'm trying everybody to be back, stretch your legs or something like that, bathroom breaks, get a snack, get something to drink, whatever, and we'll continue a little bit. Sound good? Okay, see you all in a bit. So behavioral stuff focuses on environmental elements to explain behavior, those consequences, and what happens around them. Behavior and classical operant conditioning. Get right to that. Okay, it went back. When I undid it, went back. Sorry. So the idea behind reinforcement theory, which is operant conditioning, based on the idea of behavior as a function of its consequences. So behavior that results in you having pleasant consequences is more likely to be repeated. Behavior that results in unpleasant consequences, punishment, is less likely to be repeated. That's why one of my basic rules of thumb with people when I would always talk to managers is use punishment in a very, very sparing way. Only use punishment. My rule of thumb always was you only use direct punishment if the behavior might be dangerous. And by dangerous, I use a broad definition of dangerous, meaning it might be dangerous to the person or dangerous to the organization, and therefore the behavior needs to be stopped right now. But if that's not the case, then you don't want to punish, because punishment has that suppressive nature to it, that if I punish too much, if I punish people's behavior too much, the punishment will become associated with me, and I will have a negative Pavlovian effect on the person. So just me being around will start to be punishing, and you don't want that to happen. Here's some general principles for controlling employee behavior. Positive reinforcement, which is the word used by operant conditioning people, means you reward or give them person some sort of a desirable consequence. But the consequence always follows the behavior. You don't give the reward before the behavior. So you don't say to some of you may have had this experience. You'd have a 10-year-old and you're the parent. You don't say, here's $10, take out the garbage 2 weeks from now, because that's reinforcing them before they did it. You want to reinforce them after they did it, not before. Okay? Negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is not punishment. Negative reinforcement is that there is a potential punishment there, and the person behaves to avoid the punishment. Most of our legal system is based on negative reinforcement. As you're driving your car, you drive close to the speed limit to avoid getting punished. Okay? You pay your bills on time to avoid getting the fine. Okay? So the punishment is held out there, but it's really negative reinforcement unless you receive the punishment. Your parents say, do that and you'll get spanked, right? You do the good stuff to avoid getting spanked. That's negative reinforcement. If you get spanked, that's the punishment. All right, so there's a difference between those two. Extinction is when you decrease occurrences by eliminating reinforcement that causes the behavior. So if a person is doing something, if you can figure out, and you don't want them to do it, if you can figure out what's the reinforcement they're getting out of it, then you remove that reinforcement so they're not getting it anymore. I'm drawing a blank. Can anybody think of a situation like that where a person's getting rewarded and you figure out what they're getting, what's rewarding them, so you remove that reinforcement, that reward? I can't think of any right offhand, but you probably, some of you might be able to think of something like that. But there are things like that. That's where you don't just start punishing. You say, okay, what are they getting out of this? Let's figure out how we can remove that good thing that they're getting. And then punishment, I already said, is when they actually get the adverse consequence. So negative reinforcement is typically to avoid a punishment. And most of our legal system is designed around using the threat of punishment as a way to negatively reinforce people. They will avoid those punishments. Now, what happens is if the punishment that's threatened is so trivial, why would I care? Why would I even try and avoid it? Can anybody think of something like that where you're told, or in our society where people are told, oh, if you do this, this will happen? People go, so what if that happens? Anybody think of any? No? Nobody? Come on, somebody's got to think of something. Maybe experience from your own life where, somebody, a parent threatened you with, if you don't do that, if you do that, this is what's going to happen to you. Who cares if that happens to me? I don't mind. It's not a big deal to me. That's not going to do any good. Some people say that's part of the problem in some areas with our legal system now. The punishments are so low for committing certain crimes, it's not a deterrent anymore. A deterrent, by the way, a deterrent, for something to be a deterrent, the other part about negative reinforcement are two things. One is the threatened punishment has to be big enough that you want to avoid it, okay? And in normal life, not in the legal system, but in normal life, there also has to be a pretty high probability of that punishment occurring pretty quickly. So if you say, Haley, if you do that, I'll punish you 2 years from now. And you think, I'm going to be graduated by then. Who cares? It has no deterrent effect on you then. Or if it's so minor, if you don't come in, to class on time, I'm going to take, you got to pay me a penny. Like, who cares? There's no punishment to avoid, right? It's no big deal. And then I forget to collect it anyway. Doesn't work. Okay, so those have to be in play. There has to be probability there. Some other suggestions about behaviorism: creating an inviting environment. That's classical conditioning. If people have a place where they feel comfortable, so those things actually can have. So some of those Maslow things about, or Hertzberg things about hygiene can actually be a classical conditioning type thing. So if I come to work and it's a good environment, there are people I like, that can be a reinforcing type of a thing. So I will then like that environment more. You can also show that you enjoy being there as the boss. Providing praise for desired behavior as soon as it happens as possible. That's operant conditioning. That's what the OC stands for. Operant conditioning. You're telling people right away, thanks for coming to class on time. Okay. Provide prompt feedback. Present role models from the field. Either you as the boss are a role model, or you're constantly showing people good examples of how to do it. Sometimes that's using colleagues of theirs as examples. Having colleagues, when they see, their colleagues getting rewarded for doing certain things. So let me give you an example. There was a company I used to have a video of that did a profile that was really high performance company. And one of the things they did was they did a lot with this, with both operant and classical conditioning. And classical conditioning can turn into operant conditioning. So you can classically reward people after the fact, and it can end up being operant conditioning for the people around them by observation. But they used to do a lot of what they used to call on the second reinforcement or rewards. So they could, managers didn't have to wait until the end of the quarter to reward somebody. Managers had in their power every month to give away like $5,000 for things that people did at work, as long as it was something that was actually, unique performance. And what this company did was every manager, it was a big like marketing company, right? So every manager had a little bell. And if they rang the bell, they came into the area with all the office cubicles, and they rang the bell. That means somebody got a reward. And they would ring the bell, and they're grouped together, be like 10 or 12 employees, and they'd say, Elise, come over here. Stand up here on the chair. Elise this week hit a new performance mark for herself, and here's a check for $500. Elise, thank you very much. And Elise would be really happy. And everybody around her would go, huh, Elise got that for doing that. Maybe I could get the same thing. Boom, everybody's behavior goes up. Now, what the company did was they made sure if other people matched it, they got it too. And the managers had to be careful with how they spent that money, because you couldn't spend it all on one person, then you wouldn't have anything else to give away, right? So it got in, but it was highly, highly productive. They used really simple behavioral principles and the idea of modeling folded in with everybody else saw. You didn't hide the reward. I saw an interview with the CEO of the company. He said, why would we hide the rewards? We want everybody to know about the rewards because we want everybody to think they can get it too, which they can. Because we know how they're doing. If I'm the boss, I know how that person's doing. I'm not going to give it to everybody because that's not going to motivate everybody. We got to give it to people who are doing extra special. Tell everybody how they're doing extra special. That's actually, for most people, another reward for Elise, right? Because now she's getting recognition from her peers. It's not just this chunk of money I just got handed, but everybody else is looking at me saying, wow, she's really good at this. And then all those people out there in the audience, all of her coworkers are thinking, geez, I got to do what she did. That's better than the boss telling them to do it. They're making up their own mind to be more productive. So that's how you can use behavioral types of things very powerfully. And you can even model problem solving that way, same way. You can say, here's how we're going to do things, just walk through it. Any thoughts about that? Okay. And you've seen this from earlier, but we're just going to breeze through it. The idea of that self-determination. And that's what it's called. Edward Dece's from the book Drive. DC was the guy in the book, the psychologist. It's called self-determination theory for motivation. That there is an intrinsic motivation within the person. We are intrinsically motivated. We don't need external types of things. The idea that people prefer to have control over their actions, so they feel, they can be motivated and rewarded. There's that innate needs in the third drive. Secret to high performance isn't our biological drive or our reward and punishment drive, but our third drive, our deep-seated desire to direct our own lives, extend and expand our abilities, and live a life of purpose. And I would guess for most of you, you can tell me. I'd be interested if anybody wants to comment. When you get a class that, or anything you do, but let's take classes. You don't need to tell who it is. Do these things drive you to want to do more in that class? You have some control over it. You're not just doing what the other person wants you to do. You're getting some sense of control. You're actually extending your capabilities. And it gives you some sense of how you can see this can help you have a better purpose in life. Does that make something more attractive to you? Or a class that you maybe even just want to go to more often? Are those the types of things that impact you? Or if you've even had a job like that, or been part of a group like that, can you think of any time when you had some of those types of things in play that made it more attractive, more motivating to you? Anyone? And as he says, human beings have an innate inner drive to be autonomous, self-determined, and connected to one another. And when that drive is liberated, people achieve more and live richer lives. If you ever get around to digging into that book Drive, he has some really good case examples of companies that do that. Certain parts of it are things like they call a results only workplace. So people aren't told you got to be here 40 hours a week from 8 to 5. They're told, here are the objectives for your job, get them done. As long as you get them done well, we don't care when you're here. Now, you can only do that in some environments. You can't do that if you run a 8 to 5 retail operation. You can't say, come whenever you want. You got to come when the customers are there, right? But there are some types of jobs in environments where you can do that, where you can say, it doesn't matter, like at main offices of a company, the headquarters. You don't need to have people be there at a certain time as long as they get things done. We already talked about that. Autonomy, we don't need that. Oh, it says something, okay, autonomy suggestions, provide choices and options for people in their work assignments. That's one way to do autonomy. Encourage input, makes them feel like a sense of autonomy. Allow individual workers to have input on their own goals and strategies. So I may be doing a terrible job of it, but part of the way I designed this class is just that, right? A major part of your grade is you reporting on things that you want to report on. They're from the class. Because I'm assuming if it's something that stood out for you, it's something you find valuable, right? And then that's going to be better for you in the long run, give you more of a sense of autonomy and learning things you want to do. It's also going to help you master things, right? It's going to be things that you want to master. And I set it out there a little bit, do 3 of them a week. You'll come up with 3 or 4 if you can, each class. So it's not hard to reach. And by the way, let me just say, because that last one there's about presentations of projects. We have not talked about this yet, and we will talk about it the first day we come back after the next 2 break classes about that project. Because I'm going to tell you right now, that project, how you do the project is very open-ended. So you could do it as a very traditional paper project where you write something up that's X pages long, or you could do a 10-minute presentation to class, or you could make a little video about it, or you could do a little podcast about it, or whatever you want. So I've had people do that type of a project in all different formats, and I don't care what format it is. Make it one that is most meaningful to you and that you think will allow you to best get across the information. So what am I doing there? I'm giving you more autonomy, right? You get to choose the way you want to do it. So some people will say, I'd like to do a presentation, but I hate doing presentations. We'll record an audio along with a PowerPoint and send it to me. I'm fine with that. It doesn't have to be in a paper with 12 paragraphs and all that. You can walk through the PowerPoint and say, here's what I learned, here's what happened, this is what I suggest. Or if you like giving presentations, you just, get up in front of the class for 10 minutes and do it. Whatever fits you. Yeah, for purpose, show people how practical applications work. Help people understand how it fits their future endeavors. Which is what one of my hopeful intentions is, maybe just minimally is that from all of this stuff, you'll see some possible use of some of these ideas in your future life. That's one of my big goals in this class is give you 2 or 3 things from this class that you might be able to use sometime in the future. Hopefully not in the long distance future, maybe along the way. Okay. Top 10 ironies of motivation. Most managers think money is the top motivator, but it's not. Maybe I should call these fallacies of motivation. Traditional incentive programs based on money just don't tend to motivate much. It needs to be more something that has meaning. You get what you reward is common sense. but not common practice. You ready for my corny joke? Okay, here's my corny joke of the day. Well, it's not a joke, it's more of a story. There's this fisherman out fishing. And he does it like every Saturday from spring through fall. And perfectly calm day, a Saturday morning. And he sees this water snake swimming across the water toward his little rowboat. And the water snake has a frog in its mouth. So the snake is going to eat the frog. So the fisherman looks over the side and says, that mean old snake eating that poor innocent frog. And he grabs the snake right behind the head and picks it up and squeezes the snake a little bit and opens his mouth, drops the frog. So immediately, and the frog swims away. Immediately after doing that, the fisherman gets this guilty feeling, saying, oh my gosh, I interfered with nature. I took the frog's dinner away. What can I do to pay the frog back? So he thinks and finally says, I know. He reaches in his back pocket, pulls out his flask of whiskey, opens up and gives the snake a shot. The snake kind of snaps its mouth together a couple of times. He throws the snake in the water, swims away. About 10 minutes later, fisherman's sitting there and he hears this little tap, tap, tap on the side of a boat. He says, what the? Tap, tap, tap. He looks over the edge of the boat and there's the snake with 2 frogs in its mouth. You get what you reward. Okay. Did anybody get it? It's dumb, but the idea, he rewarded the snake for the wrong behavior, so came back doing more of it, right? So don't use rewards as distractions. They only reward. They don't distract you. Things that are most motivating to employees tend to be relatively easy to do and cost the least. You want to find out what motivates somebody? Ask them. They'll tell you. Hey, if I did this, would it make you work harder? Nope. Okay, then don't do it. Figure out what motivates them. What motivates others is often different from what motivates you. You got to realize that, just because I'm motivated by, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches or whatever, doesn't mean anybody else is. Sometimes fun, simple, and creative rewards work the best. They don't have to be fantastic and great. The greatest impact of using formal awards comes from their symbolic value. That, it's a symbolic thing that gives people some prestige. Recognizing performance will result in more of that behavior. Managers don't tend to focus on employee motivation until it's lost. All of a sudden, everybody's not performing. They go, oh, I better do something. You should be doing it all the time. And it takes less effort to sustain desired behavior and performance than it does to initially create it. Sustaining performance is easier than building it. But you got to continue to remember to give people good consequences. And the more you help employees develop marketable skills, the more likely they are to stay with your organization. People want to stay places where they're getting things done. Any thoughts on any of that? Anybody? Anything that stood out tonight so far? Anything that you're thinking about? Any questions? Any relationship to anything? So what we're going to do now is we're going to watch this short video. And what I want you, we're going to experiment. If it starts to get choppy and not coming through for some reason, let me know and we'll stop, because there's no sense trying to do something. And sometimes when you try and do videos on on Zoom, it doesn't work very well, but we'll see how it goes. If this doesn't work, I have a little 6-minute one that I made that's about perception. It's just kind of a fun one that we could watch instead. So what I want you to do is to think about this. This is an old 60 Minutes thing that was done years ago, called Joy in the Congo. And think about this in relation to Maslow's hierarchy, okay? So think about this in relation to Maslow's hierarchy. Let me start it and we'll see if the sound's coming through for everybody and everything. And then if it gets choppy, somebody, raise your hand and just cut in and say it's breaking up or something. Okay, here we go.
Beauty has a way of turning up in places where you'd least expect it. We went to the Democratic Republic of Congo 2 years ago, the poorest country in the world. Kinshasa, the capital, has a population of 10 million and almost nothing in the way of hope or peace. Until recently, there was a well-kept secret down there, a symphony orchestra, the only one in Central Africa, the only all-black one in the world. It's called the Kimbangist Symphony Orchestra. We'd never heard of it. No one we called had ever heard of it. But when we got there, we were surprised to find 200 musicians and vocalists who'd never played outside Kinshasa or had been outside Kinshasa. We were even more surprised to find joy in the Congo. When we told the musicians they would be on 60 Minutes, they didn't know what we were talking about. But still, they invited us to a performance. And tonight, we thought it would be good to hear them again. We caught up with them as they were preparing outside their concert hall, a rented warehouse. As curtain time neared, we had no idea what to expect, but Maestro Armand Diengienda seemed confident and began the evening with a bang. The music, Carmina Burana, was written by German composer Karl Orff 75 years ago. Did he ever dream that it would be played in the Congo? It wouldn't have been if it hadn't been for Armand and a strange twist of fate. Armand was a commercial pilot until 20 years ago when his airline went bust. So, like ex-pilots often do, he decided to put together an orchestra. He was just missing a few things. You had no musicians, you had no teachers, you had no instruments, and you had no one who knew how to read music.
No, nobody.
Armand's English is limited. He preferred speaking French, Congo's official language. When you started asking people if they wanted to be members of this orchestra, did they have any idea what you were talking about?
In
the beginning, he said, people made fun of us, saying here in the Congo, classical music puts people to sleep. But Armand pressed on. He taught himself how to read music and play the piano, play the trombone, the guitar, and the cello. He talked a few members of his church into joining him. They brought their friends, which brought more problems. We only had 5 or 6 violins, he said, for the 12 people who wanted to learn how to play the violin. So they took turns, he said. One would play for 15 or 20 minutes at a time. That was very difficult. But more instruments started coming in. Some were donated, others rescued from local thrift shops in various states of disrepair. Then it was up to Albert, the orchestra surgeon, to heal them. He wasn't always gentle with his patients, but they survived. Armand told us that when a violin string broke in those early days, they used whatever they had at hand to fix it. He took the wire from a bicycle,
Yes.
the brake of a bicycle, and turned it into a string for a violin.
Yes.
And it played music.
Oui.
And with every functioning instrument, more would-be musicians poured in. Before long, Armand's house became a makeshift conservatory. Armand was the dean. Every room, every corridor, no matter how small or dark or stifling, was teeming with sound. Outdoors, the parking lot was a quiet spot to practice the viola. But even this was an oasis compared to what was on the other side of the walls. The Congo is, after all, a war-torn country, has been for 60 years. This is where most of the musicians live, on unpaved streets, with little in the way of running water, electricity, or sanitation. The musicians don't get paid for playing in the orchestra. Some work in the market, selling whatever they can. Very few people in Kinshasa make more than $50 a month or live past 50. Sylvie and Bella's life has gotten even more demanding since she started in the orchestra 17 years ago. She's got 3 kids now. There are no daycare centers in the neighborhood, so the kids are always with her, never far from her fiddle. But when she turns from mother to musician, she says she has left this planet. She's not in the Congo anymore. For years, Sylvie and the orchestra played on, but only in Kinshasa. No one outside the Congo knew anything about them until 2010. That's when 2 German filmmakers made a documentary which was shown in Germany. It so inspired musicians in Germany, they sent down instruments and then themselves to give master classes. Opera vocalists Rolf Schmitz-Malberg and Sabine Kallhammer came to teach technique and diction. And if you ever question that music is the universal language, watch this. A German-speaking teacher tutoring a French-speaking African how to sing an aria in Italian. But when Rolf and Sabine moved on to the full choir, it wasn't so easy. Were they pleased to see you? Do you think that they said, "Oh, how wonderful, we have 2 white people here to teach us how to play music"?
They had experiences with other white people, so I can really understand that they were careful and a little shy, but they really were open to learn.
At times they weren't sure what they were learning or why. What was this all about? The exercises are designed to loosen you up, the Germans explained, and after a while, they did.
And then they started to sing for us, and then we were like, oh. Their faces change when they do their music. I mean, if you live in Kinshasa, there's no culture life here. So these people have to find a way to go to some other places. Making music is one way to go on a trip, a cheap trip, because you can just close your eyes. They do that very often, and they are somewhere else.
Bien, bravo, bravo. Merci beaucoup. Diesen Kuss hier.
Rolf moved on to the next class. That's where we met 2 tenors, brothers Karim and Valvi Bilolo. They live in the countryside, 10 miles from Armand's place. They took us there.
Ma fille,
The boy's parents, two brothers and a sister, share a three-room blockhouse. Karim and Valvi certainly had to learn the importance of harmony growing up here, so by the time they met Armand, harmony was second nature. When did you join the orchestra?
en 2003. Le 8 novembre 2003.
The 8th of November in 2003.
Yes.
Why do you think you remember the exact date?
Bon, c'est la naissance, hein?
Well, he said, it's like a birth for us in this symphony orchestra, so it's a date we can't forget. And this is how they get to rehearsal. 6 days a week, 90 minutes each way. Some would call it a trek. For them, it's a commute. When they get downtown, the last stretch is on a bus. What keeps them going? The music. Always the music.
They come here every day, they sing, and they go home. It's really amazing.
It's pretty difficult to relate to that, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think that anybody would do that with these conditions in our country, no.
The boys and the choir have quite a repertoire now. Bach, Mendelssohn, Handel, and of course, Beethoven. The week we were there, the orchestra was rehearsing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Not exactly starter music, but Armand was determined to take it on. And like a good general, he reviewed all his troops. The choir? Okay. The strings? Not bad. But the full orchestra? Not quite. French horns, he said. You're hitting it too hard. Be mindful of the echo, he told the string section. Finally, it all came together. And on the night of the performance, in this rented warehouse, Beethoven came alive. It's called the Ode to Joy, the last movement of Beethoven's Last Symphony. It has been played with more expertise before, but with more joy, hard to imagine. In the last 2 years since we first broadcast this story, the orchestra has been invited to perform in some major cities, including Berlin, Monte Carlo, and Los Angeles. The story is also sad for us. The wonderful man who co-produced it, Clem Taylor, died a month ago.
Thoughts? Comments? Relative to Maslow's hierarchy. Especially.
You had mentioned earlier, kind of obviously they put physiological first, but you were talking about how people will walk a long way to get some of these what Maslow would call less important needs, but people will put sometimes even a bigger emphasis. Sometimes people spend more effort on what they list as like less, core needs, because like social creatures that matters a lot to us.
Mhm. Yeah. Other thoughts? Anything else strike anybody? Doesn't have to be about that. Anything else?
I think it was cool how they said that they don't have like as many basic needs or like safety that are on the lower level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but they really emphasize like the social aspect and just like the community and like what makes them feel best and be happy, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sort of their sense of purpose. Yeah. Other thoughts by anybody? Nothing else? Anybody have anything else before we finish up for the night? We'll get done early. Any other thoughts? Any other questions about anything else? About what we've done up to this point in the class, not just tonight, but in the class in general and going forward? Any questions anyone has about anything? Oh, here we go. Here we go. This is obviously a picture of a horse. But can you answer the following question? Which is closer to you, the front of the horse or the rear of the horse? We can recognize a perfectly normal human face, even when it's upside down. Or can we? These two buildings look the same, except the one on the right is a bit more tilted. Or is it? In this picture, is line AB or line AC longer? Most people choose line AC, but when we remove all of the background and tilt the lines, you can see that they're the same length. Once again, AC looks longer though. In this picture, the orange line on the right looks much longer than the orange line on the left until we do this. And then you can see they're the same length. Here we have a series of irregularly shaped concentric rings. Watch what happens when we draw a line over one of the rings. We see that they're not irregularly shaped, they're actually perfectly circular. Here, the horizontal lines don't seem to be parallel, except they're perfectly parallel. Our brain gets confused because of the irregular vertical lines. Here we see two tables, a longer, narrower table on the left and a shorter, wider table on the right. If you look at the object in the middle, it clearly looks like the top half is a darker shade than the bottom half. But if you hold your finger horizontally across the center of the object, you'll see that the top and the bottom are the same shade of gray. I can do it on the screen, but you won't believe that I didn't change the color unless you do it yourself. Here you see a ball rolling back and forth across a flat surface. Watch what happens when we just change one thing in this video. All that was changed was the position of the shadow. And now you perceive the ball flying up off of the surface. Here's an even better one. This ball is going on the same line as the last ball, and it looks like it's zigzagging. The reason it looks like it's zigzagging is the shadow is going up and down. And even if I draw a line along the ball's path, it's difficult for you to not see the ball zigzagging. This square on the Rubik's Cube and this square look like they're very different colors. One in the front looks much brighter. But in reality, they're the same shade of brown. Your brain interprets the one in the front as being brighter because it's in a shadow. Once again, it looks bright. Here you see a round circle with white balls rolling around inside it. But each ball is actually moving in a straight line. Watch as one ball is added at a time. You see one ball going back and forth in a straight line. And then a second one. And then an amazing thing happens. Depending on the individual, it's somewhere between 3 and 5 balls being added. All of a sudden, your brain snaps and it sees rolling motion. And it can't unsee the rolling motion. Even with the lines there. What do you see in this picture? Most people say a triangle, but there isn't a triangle in this picture. There are 3 sets of rings with a notch cut out of each of them. But people see a triangle. In fact, most people see the triangle as a brighter shade than the rest of the background, when it's exactly the same shade. There is no triangle there. In this picture, it looks like the heart is constantly growing. It's not moving at all. It's a static picture. But the shading is interpreted by your brain as movement. The lesson is that each person's perception is unique. Each person's perception is reality to them. So to influence another's perception, you have to start where they currently are. What you perceive is what you believe. And what you believe is what you perceive. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for joining me. Any comments? Some little optical illusion things. How our brain processes. We take things and we see different things that are actually there. Before we close up, anything anybody want to say?